Insigne!
Yes! The center back, Jacob Glesnes, is going for it. Oh my God! What a goal!
And that will do it! One of the best comebacks in recent years. 3 unanswered by the Union. And they go into the Gold Cup break, winning it 3-2.
Hello and welcome to the Free Kick Podcast. My name is Todd, and I know it's been a couple of weeks since I last recorded a podcast. A lot has happened in the MLS world. Thank goodness we didn't get any players selected in the expansion draft by Charlotte. Man, I feel like that was like a year ago, and it's only been, I feel like, 2 weeks ago since the expansion draft. By the time you guys are listening to this podcast, maybe it's already the New Year's. So you guys obviously won't get a podcast. I mentioned it in the previous episode that I'll be gone from basically the beginning of January to the middle of January. So I'll be gone for half of January, so you won't have a podcast then. But, you know, if anything big breaks, if any big news breaks, then maybe we can convince my good pal Brad down in Tennessee to come on and host the podcast, putting the pressure on you, Brad. No, Brad, you don't have to host the podcast if something big breaks while I am away down in Florida. But, you know, no, the offer's there. If something huge breaks and you feel like we need content out there in the Union world and you want to record it, look, all the power to you, Brad. I trust you 100%. But no, if nothing big breaks, then you guys will find some way to get by in the off season. But once I return back from Florida, like I also mentioned in the last episode, look, I decided not to do the trivia podcast in the off season this season just because the MLS season is starting up faster than it's ever started before, and I felt like, you know, that's not enough time for myself or the contestants to get through a trivia show. And like I said, the trivia show is coming back during the World Cup in 2022 because we're going to have a lot of downtime next season. So, look, I want all Philadelphia Union fans, if you've never been on the podcast, if you've been on the podcast before, just, you know, we can talk about the 2021 Philadelphia Union season. We can talk about the off season. We can talk about whatever you want in regards to the Philadelphia Union. So that's my goal. That's my hope. Once I come back from vacation, that people will want to come onto the podcast and we can talk the Philadelphia Union until the regular season's here. But like I said, look, there was a ton of news the last couple weeks. I know I really haven't been that active on social media. I've retweeted stuff, but I haven't given my thoughts really. And yeah, that's what the podcast is for, right? To get those thoughts out there. So without further ado, let's just get straight into the news. So starting off, Montreal have acquired defender Alistair Johnston from Nashville for $1 million in GAM. Montreal is sending $750,000 in GAM in 2022 to Nashville, and then Nashville will also receive $250,000 in 2023. Now, Nashville, they also included a 10% sell-on clause starting at $1 million should Johnston be transferred in the future. Johnston, he signed a new 2-year deal with Montreal with the options for the 2024 and 2025 season. Johnston was selected 11th overall in the 2020 MLS Super Draft by Nashville. He has played 18 times for Canada. He's been a very, very solid player for Nashville. Montreal are getting themselves a really good player. And, you know, just because the Philadelphia Union don't believe in the Super Draft doesn't mean that other teams don't believe in the Super Draft. And since Johnston came into MLS 2 years ago, you know, he's definitely made a name for himself, and he's gathering attention for himself. And look, it shows. 18 times he's played already for the national team. And I got to imagine if he plays well for Montreal, he's probably going to go to a European club. And I know I was reading reports out there where some writers were a little bit surprised that Nashville was sending Johnston to Montreal. They thought that he was surely going to go to a European team with how many times he's played for Canada, with how well he's played for Nashville. But he gets traded to Montreal and MLS, and Nashville gets a ton of GAM, and they've been slowly but surely adding a ton of GAM for the 2022 season. So I think it's only a matter of time before we see Nashville announce a DP signing. I would expect it's probably going to be a midfielder, and then they'll just buy down that contract with all the GAM that they have. So look, they're trading away their international spots. They are trading away players for GAM. So look, by the time that this podcast is out, maybe Nashville have already acquired a DP signing, but that is something to keep an eye on. Moving on, because there is a lot that I do want to talk about. I don't want to spend too much time talking about some of these news, but I picked some of the hottest topics of the biggest news bits from MLS. I mean, there was a ton. I mean, we could spend a whole episode talking about news, but we are not going to do that. I'm just picking the biggest that have happened the last couple of weeks. Atlanta United, though, they have signed MLS veteran Ozzie Alonso to a one-year contract with a club option for the 2023 season. He spent 10 seasons in Seattle and won 6 trophies, including the 2016 MLS Cup. He played the last 3 seasons with Minnesota United. Alonso, who is 36 years old, he has 338 career MLS regular season appearances, 317 starts, and a total of 27,911 minutes played. This guy has been a staple for all these years for Seattle. Then he goes into Minnesota. A little bit surprised that Minnesota didn't re-sign him. And you saw midway through the season that Pineda signs as the new head coach for Atlanta United. And where was Pineda before he was at Atlanta United? He was with Seattle. So Ozzie and Pineda spent a lot of time in Seattle with each other. Everybody says he's a great locker room presence, and Atlanta United are getting themselves a really good player. Will he start for Atlanta United at the age of 36? Maybe here and there. To be an every week starter, I would be very, very surprised. But the one thing he brings is experience into that locker room. He brings that leadership. And for a team that hit the ground running when they joined MLS, and then they just collapsed the last 2 seasons. Bringing in a player like Ozzie is great for that club, great for that city, and I think, he's the type of player that can just change their whole mentality in that locker room if they're lacking anything. But, once Pineda was announced as the head coach, he did already start turning around Atlanta United. So, yeah, it will be interesting to see what Atlanta United and Ozzie Alonso do next season. But moving on, Sporting Kansas City, they have selected Robert Beric from Chicago Fire in the MLS re-entry draft. In his 2 seasons for Chicago, Beric had 20 goals and 56 appearances. He's 30 years old. And now, this is the interesting thing. Just because Sporting Kansas City selected Beric from Chicago Fire, it does not mean he is going to be a Sporting Kansas City player. He was a DP player last year and the year prior for the Chicago Fire. I highly doubt Sporting Kansas City will pay him DP money. And so if Sporting Kansas City and Beric can't agree to a contract, then Beric is free to go and sign wherever he wants. But that just means that Sporting Kansas City will have rights of first refusal if Beric stays within MLS. So it'll be interesting to see if Beric wants to stay in MLS. I know a lot of people were reporting that he's probably going to go back to Europe. So just keep your eye out on that. But moving on, the New England Revolution, they have signed defender Omar Gonzalez. Shout out to the former University of Maryland Terrapin. They signed Omar to a 2-year contract and traded for midfielder Sebastian Lletget from the LA Galaxy. Now, the LA Galaxy will receive $300,000 in GAM in 2022, with an additional $200,000 in 2023. The deal could see additional $800,000 100,000 base incentives spread out over the next 2 seasons for a total of $1.3 million in GAM, which is pretty big trade, a pretty big deal within MLS, where you don't really see too many trades within MLS, and you don't really see a lot of loans within MLS, and we'll talk about that a lot later on, I promise you guys that. But yeah, $1.3 million in GAM. I feel like the incentives that LA Galaxy could potentially receive in these 2 years, I feel like they're probably achievable, because if they weren't, then they probably wouldn't have accepted this deal for $500,000 in GAM. So to see Lletget potentially get LA Galaxy $1.3 million in GAM, where there was reports that Lletget just wanted out of the Galaxy, that they couldn't really figure out where to play him in the lineup. They played him at different positions, but it just wasn't working out under Greg Vanney. And, Bruce Arena said, look, we already signed Omar Gonzalez. Let's go ahead and sign Sebastian Lletget, and let's get the band back together. So it looks like New England Revolution are looking to be Galaxy East. And then Gonzalez, he has over 420 appearances as a professional soccer player, has played for the LA Galaxy and Toronto in MLS. He's a 3-time MLS Cup winner, 2-time Supporters Shield winner. A great veteran to have on your team. But I am surprised to see him given a 2-year contract, where the last couple seasons for Toronto, it seemed like Omar just was riding off to the sunset, calling it a great career, but he definitely wasn't the player that he was for the LA Galaxy back when he was winning those trophies, back when he was a staple in the United States men's national team's starting 11. Bruce trusts Omar enough to say, hey, look, we're going to give you a 2-year deal. So, yeah, it will be interesting to see how much playing time Omar Gonzalez will get with the New England Revolution. Moving on, though, Houston Dynamo, they have signed goalkeeper Steve Clark to a 2-year deal. He spent the last 3.5 years with the Portland Timbers. He's also spent time with the Columbus Crew and DC United. A little bit surprised to see Portland let their starting goalkeeper go, but they felt they were better off. And I don't know, after that blunder he had for the first goal that he gave up to Castellanos, yeah, maybe they are right. But at the same time, it was pretty wet, so anything can happen when the ball's that slippery. But moving on, Club America, they have signed former LA Galaxy midfielder Jonathan Dos Santos. And this is something I talked about either last week or whenever I last recorded the podcast. It definitely wasn't last week. It was 2-3 weeks ago. But this is something that I talked about being a possibility that Jonathan would potentially go back to Mexico. And I'm not surprised he's going back to Mexico. What I'm most surprised about is it's Club America. Because when we played Club America, I thought that the strongest part of Club America's team was the midfield. So I really don't see how a declining Jonathan Dos Santos gets into that Club America starting 11 unless Club America has a deal lined up to sell somebody. But yeah, just totally shocked that it's Club America that Dos Santos is going to. Now, here's the big one that everybody is talking about. Toronto FC are set to sign Napoli and Italy winger Lorenzo Insigne, and man, I have a lot of thoughts about this. But before I get into that, Fabrizio Romano is reporting that it's a $12.4 million per season net guaranteed contract, $5 million in incentives, a 5.5-year contract. Insigne had 414 appearances with Napoli with 114 goals, 53 appearances with Italy with 10 goals. And look, one part of me likes this move because I know who the player is, and he's been such a staple in that Italian starting 11 over the years. He's Napoli's captain, for crying out loud. Yeah, he'll be 31 years old, but just watching Insigne play in the Champions League and watching very little Serie A, it seems like he's a player that still has a lot to give. And of course, everybody comes out of the woodworks where You have a big name in Insigne. They're like, oh, look at MLS. It's a retirement league. Blah, 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 blah. And in one sense, I hear you guys. But, if you guys actually paid attention to MLS, you guys would notice that the whole mindset of these MLS clubs are to go to South America, sign young South American players, go to Europe, sign young European players, to go ahead and then sell them back to Europe after they fix their careers in MLS, after they start to make a name for themselves in MLS, then they go ahead and get sold. Or now you see teams investing into the academy, where after a couple seasons, those players are now getting sold over to European clubs. And you see Ricardo Pepe for FC Dallas, potential to be on the move to Wolfsburg in Germany. So that's one to keep an eye out on. But Lorenzo Insigne, I like him. I really do. I like him a lot. And you're talking $12.4 million in a net guaranteed contract. How can Insigne turn that down? And, if I was him, I wouldn't. When Napoli, it was reported that are only offering him $4 million a season. When a team's tripling what Napoli are offering you, you just can't. You can't say no to that contract. But at the same time, I do like the way that the Union do it, where they're not paying one guy an astronomical amount of money, where it can disrupt the locker room. And look, I do want the Union to invest more money into the team, but I don't want them spending so much money on one player where it's... I'm not sure if players would get upset over a transfer fee. I think players are probably fine with a transfer fee. It's the salaries where players have an issue with. And I don't want the Union spending $10 million, and I know the Union will never spend $10 million on one player. But let's just pretend right here. I don't want the Union spending $10 million on one player where you're going to be probably paying him a salary in the top 10 highest earners in MLS, where, you have some guys on the Philadelphia Union's roster who are making less than $100,000 a year. And that can cause problems. And Ernst Tanner has talked about it plenty of times, where they don't want to sign players like that because it does. It does create a locker room issue. And how many times in Europe have we seen where a player, they're playing for a salary and they have one really, really good season, a contract year. They get that high salary, and then they completely stop trying. I look at players like Anthony Martial at Manchester United. I look at Aubameyang once he got that huge salary at Arsenal. Ozil's another player. When he got that huge salary at Arsenal, he stopped caring. You look at Carlos Tevez when he went to China. He was making like $650,000 a week. The dude didn't care. You see Oscar, who could have been a staple in the Brazilian lineup. He was a great young player for Chelsea. He chooses money over soccer. And I get it in one sense. Your family and you are set for life when clubs are spending all this money for you. And you only get one career. And if you can get it from playing soccer, in one sense, you're going to take that money, right? Where you're set for life, where you bring generational wealth to your whole family, not just yourself. But, at the same time, too, as fans, it does hurt when you see these players, they work hard to get these salaries, and then they stop trying. They don't care anymore once they get the payday. They don't care. Because it's like they signed this guaranteed contract, and they don't care. The team still has to pay that money one way or another. They don't care. They worked hard to get that salary, and now here's this team paying $350,000 a week for Aubameyang, and the dude can't stay healthy. The guy's not what he was when he first got at Arsenal, or what he was when he got to Dortmund. But look, we're not talking about European players. We're talking about MLS and me not wanting the Philadelphia Union to spend a crazy amount of money in salary for one player. Because look, it is super hard to create a team-first mentality in a locker room. And I think a big part of that is because the Philadelphia Union aren't going out here signing these superstars. They're not going out here spending top 10, top 20 in salary for highest paid player. And yeah, it would be nice for the Philadelphia Union to spend $6, $7, $8 million on one player. It would be nice for that, right? But you got to question, like, how would that affect the locker room? And I feel like the last couple of years, the Philadelphia Union have worked very, very hard to create this tight-knit locker room where everybody is bought into team first, my personal stats second. And we've seen that plenty of times in MLS where Zlatan Ibrahimovic doesn't care about the LA Galaxy, cares about getting paid by the LA Galaxy. And, it just so happened to work out for the LA Galaxy that Zlatan was somehow able to come back from these major knee injuries and get another chance in Europe with AC Milan. But it doesn't always work out that way. Could Toronto potentially sell Lorenzo Insigne? Yeah, maybe to a Middle Eastern club, but they're not going to make a profit on Lorenzo Insigne if he scores, like, let's say, I don't know. Say he scores 30 goals in one season. Some team in Europe's not going to overpay for Insigne. They're just not going to do it. I think the Insigne and Giovinco signings are completely different. Because in one aspect, I do like this move because, like I said, he was a staple for Napoli. He was the club captain. He's a staple for Italy, where Giovinco was a substitute for Juventus. Wasn't a mainstay in the Italian national team. But he comes over here and he's a huge superstar for MLS. Where Lorenzo Insigne, I think he will be a superstar because he's still playing at such a high level right now for Napoli, where Giovinco, when he comes over here, nobody knows what he has left to offer because he wasn't getting it done with Juventus, and Juventus were fine with letting him go. And it's not like Napoli want Lorenzo Insigne to go. They're offering him a contract. They're just not offering him triple the contract that Toronto is offering. And like I said, I mean, how can you say no to that if you're Insigne? Like I talked about, I mean, look, you only have one career, and he's creating generational wealth for his family with signing for Toronto. And Toronto's not a bad place to live at all. Now, I guess on the flip side, with Insigne signing for Toronto, he's probably not going to get called up to the Italian national team anymore. Which I don't think, after this World Cup, I don't think Insigne would probably get caught up anymore just because he's going to be 31 years old and they have a lot of young wingers coming up through the system where it's probably going to be the last hurrah for Insigne if Italy qualify for the World Cup in 2022. But, how much does Insigne signing for Toronto, how much does that do well for the league? How much does this push the needle? I think this is a good move in one sense because it's a big player coming over that still has something to give. And I get why Toronto is doing this, right? They're coming off a horrible season where, on paper, they should have been in the playoffs. They should have been fighting for a top 4 spot in the Eastern Conference, a top 6 spot in all of MLS, in my opinion, with the names they had on that roster. But they underperformed. The DP players didn't show up. Soteldo is apparently on the way out right now for Toronto. They spent big money for him last season. Played horrible. Couldn't adjust to MLS. I think he's a very, very talented player. I think there's definitely a player in there. But if Toronto can flip him, if he doesn't want to be in MLS anymore, then they're going to go ahead and get rid of him. So I get why Toronto's going out here spending big on Insigne because they're trying to win the fans back over after Toronto just completely blew up last season. And it's not the way that those Toronto fans thought the season would go. And Insigne probably helps bridge that gap a little bit between the fans and the front office. Like, hey, look, we went out. We got you a player that's still playing at a high level. We expect him to perform well for Toronto. Hopefully Insigne can, make everything okay between us. And then looking at it for a league perspective, mean, I, Insigne is a big name, but he's not Zlatan. So I'm not really sure Insigne really moves the needle that much. So from a league perspective, I don't think it's the greatest deal in the world because we've seen what Chicharito's not done in MLS. I mean, last season it was a comeback season for him. Higuain's done nothing. Matuidi's done nothing. I mean, we can list so many older European players that have done nothing in MLS. And I don't think Insigne is those players, but I also don't think he moves the needle. And look, I can be completely wrong about that, and this can turn out to be a great signing for the league. For Toronto, I think it will be a great signing but for MLS as a whole, I'm not really sure it's that. But let's go ahead and move on and talk about Pat Noonan being announced as the new FC Cincinnati head coach. He was a 4-year assistant under Bruce Arena at LA Galaxy, a 4-year assistant under Jim Curtin from 2018 to 2021. He was a assistant with the national team in 2017. Look, Pat Noonan, he was Jim Curtin's right-hand man. He oversaw all tactical aspects during the game for the Union. Pat would also lead most of the training sessions for the Union. And Ernst Tenner had this to say about Pat Noonan. He said, his tactical coaching style and investment in his players have set him up for a successful future. He has our appreciation for the work that he's done here, and we wish him the best in Cincinnati. And look, how many times have we heard Jim Curtin announce to the media that, look, Pat Noonan's ready for a job? You guys heard when I had Brad Weigel on the podcast from Cincinnati Soccer Talk, when I was like, look, this is the guy you guys need to hire, Pat Noonan. And he was kind of iffy about it. He's like, oh, well, you're asking us to take a first-year GM and Chris Albright. I'm like, why are you questioning? Why? Not so much Brad, but, like, I've seen a lot of Cincinnati fans, like, questioning the hiring of Chris Albright. Like, oh, well, he's a first-year GM, blah, 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 blah. Like, Chris Albright's been ready for that job for a while. And Chris Albright's now getting a ton of praise on Cincinnati Twitter, where he's making a lot of great moves for Cincinnati. And then when I said, yeah, Pat Noonan to Brad, he's like, I mean, that's asking a lot. A first-year GM, a first-year head coach. We've already suffered enough. But, yeah, just because Pat Noonan's a first-year head coach, like, I don't think Cincinnati fans realize, and maybe even some Union fans, I don't think they realize how much Pat Noonan had control over the first team with his training sessions, with his tactical changes during games. Like, this guy did a lot for the Philadelphia Union, and not saying that, Jim Curtin did nothing for the Philadelphia Union, does nothing for the Philadelphia Union, because he definitely does. Jim Curtin's big plus, his big thing is he's a motivator. And he gets everybody to play for the bad. He gets everybody to play for one another. And I've talked about that in the past before. You have managers that are either man managers, or you have managers that are good tactically. It's very rare that you get a manager that's good at both. And Jim Curtin so happens to be a manager that's good at man managing. Pat Noonan is a good tactical coach because look at the success that the Philadelphia Union have had since 2018, since Pat Noonan joined. They've had the most points in MLS since 2019. And it was only a matter of time before Pat Noonan got the head coaching job someplace. And it's no surprise that it is Cincinnati because of his relationship with Chris Albright. And look, I'm happy we get to keep Jim Curtin, and sucks to lose Pat Noonan. But look, it was expected, and I think I would rather have Jim Curtin than Pat Noonan. I think, but I don't know. We'll see what Pat Noonan does in Cincinnati. I think he'll do a very good job with Cincinnati, and hopefully those fans are patient with Pat Noonan, with Chris Albright. But, if they're not, we will gladly take them here in Philadelphia. But Jim Curtin did admit, too, that the Philadelphia Union will be looking internally as well as abroad in Europe and in MLS, as Jim said that him and Ernst have both got a ton of calls from overseas, from within MLS, to come and be Jim Curtin's assistant coach. Because Jim Curtin said, look, people appreciate the culture that we've created here at the Philadelphia Union. They appreciate the work that we have done the last couple seasons. They know it's a successful franchise. They know it's a successful team. Now, I guess not in terms of trophies, because at the end of the day, that's what we all want, right? It's trophies. But if you look, the most points with how much Jim Curtin and Ernst Tanner have done, with how little the Philadelphia Union have spent, they've done it the best in MLS, in my opinion. And people want to come over here and learn from Ernst Tanner. They want to learn from Jim Curtin. They want to see how this team is run. So when it's their turn to be a head coach, they can say, hey, look, I learned from Jim Curtin. I had Ernst Tanner as a mentor. And then that Jim Curtin coaching tree just continues to grow even more. Which, by the way, I don't know if you guys saw this, but former Philadelphia Union player Connor Casey has been announced as the Charleston Battery head coach. So wish Connor Casey all the best with Charleston. But look, Jim Curtin can slowly but surely start adding coaches to his coaching tree as more and more people start to go out and get head coaching jobs. But those are my thoughts on Pat Noonan to Cincinnati. Wish him all the best. And like I said, hopefully Cincinnati fans can be patient. But I don't know, those guys on social media been fooling themselves as of late. So asking them to be patient, I think that's a tough ask. But moving on, Jack Elliott is in line for a new contract. We all knew that. Last week or 2 weeks ago, I forget when the end of the season press conference was. Last week, I think it was. Ernst Tanner, he said that, yeah, the Philadelphia Union are dealing with that. He said hopefully they can announce something soon in regards to Jack Elliott getting a brand new contract. We saw Jacob Glesnes get a new contract. We saw Kai Wagner last season get a new contract. We saw Jose Martinez get a new contract last year, I believe it was. So it's not surprising to see Jack Elliott because, look, this was his last option on his deal, and then he would be a free agent. So, of course, the Philadelphia Union don't want him to walk for nothing. The Philadelphia Union take care of their own. If they contribute to the team, if they're a staple in this team, then they reward them with a new contract. I mean, I just kind of see the Philadelphia Union paying Jacob Glesnes more money than they did Jack Elliott because both of those guys are so vital to the defense, to the team, playing out of the back. They were in the top 5 for block shots, for clearances, for long ball accuracy out of the back. So to see Ernst Tanner say, yeah, we're working on a deal for Jack Elliott. Hopefully, like I said, depending on when you guys listen to this podcast, maybe Jack Elliott already has a new contract. Let's hope. Because, look, here's the thing, too, right? We'll talk about Kai Wagner, his latest quotes to Transfer Market here in a little bit. But I think a lot of people get excited when they see, oh, blah, blah, blah has signed a new 4 or 5 year contract. That means they're going to be here for 4 or 5 years. No, it doesn't mean that they're going to be here for all those years. It just means that the Philadelphia Union now have leverage when a team comes and says, hey, look, we really want this player. And the Philadelphia Union can go ahead and say, okay, that's fine. They just signed a new contract there, by the way. So you're going to have to pay even more money because they're under contract with us for X amount of years. You see it all the time in Europe, right? Where, look at Virgil van Dijk. He signed a new contract with Southampton, and then once the January transfer market opened up, signs with Liverpool. Now, Liverpool had to pay a premium because he signed that contract, but it's good business for the Philadelphia Union where they're taking care of their own. They're rewarding these players for their good season they had, for their contributions the last couple seasons. And at the same time, too, now the Philadelphia Union have more leverage when they potentially ship these guys off. Because I do think Jack Elliott's good enough to play in Europe. I do think Jacob Glesnes is good to play in Europe. I think Jose Martinez is good. I think Jamir Montero, Kai Wagner, Daniel Gazdag. We have a ton of guys on this team that can go back to Europe and maybe not play for a top tier club, but they can definitely play, I think, in top 5 leagues, maybe for mid-table teams, maybe teams that are going to get relegated. I think they can play for those kind of teams. To play for top of the top, best of the best teams? Probably not, but, we could be surprised. You never know until it happens, right? But moving on, like I said, Kai Wagner, his latest quotes. Again, Kai Wagner says that he wants to go back to Europe. It's no surprise. Last episode, I said that out of all the players, I think Kai Wagner's the most likeliest to get sold back to Europe. Kai Wagner said at Transfer Market, he said, I want to take the step to Europe in January. I want to prove myself that I can play in Europe. I'm honest enough to say that I want to do it now. I also want to be closer to my family. Kai Wagner, he is under contract for the 2022 season with a club option for the 2023 season. Now, Kai Wagner, he'll be 25 come February, which isn't old at all. I mean, he's entering the prime of his career. So it makes sense that Kai Wagner wants to go back to Europe. And I do think, like I just said, I do think Kai Wagner can play in Europe. I do think Kai Wagner is ready to go back to Europe. But I also think, if Kai Wagner gets a move to a top 5 league and plays well, I think he can get a chance to play for the German national team. And I know that's probably wild for some people to think, like, what? The Philadelphia Union had a player that's now playing for the German national team, that he rediscovered his career with the Philadelphia Union, got to move back to Europe, and now he's playing for the German national team. Like, I think that's, it's crazy to fathom that. But if you look at it, Germany really hasn't produced a top left back in so long. And currently they have Robert Gosens, who plays as a left wing back for Atalanta in Italy. He's been playing as a left back for Germany. And Gosens, he's kind of had himself a similar path as Kai Wagner. They were both overlooked by Bundesliga teams. Both of them found themselves playing for lower league teams. Kai Wagner in Germany, Robin playing in the Netherlands. And he's not a natural left back, but Germany's so desperate for a left back that they turn a winger / midfielder into a left back. And now he's playing as a left wing back for Atalanta. So he's done a great job for Atalanta and for Germany. But if Kai Wagner, who is a natural left back, produces good for a top 5 league team, I don't see why he wouldn't start getting calls for the German national team. Because look, let's face it, Kai Wagner probably wouldn't get called up to the German national team if he continues to play in MLS. I think that whole stigma is dumb for these national teams, but I guess they look at it as, how would the media feel if we're calling up a player from MLS? We're a top 10 team in the world, and we're calling up a player from MLS. Like, the media is not going to think too kindly of that, but I don't think that matters. If the player is good enough, then they should be playing for the national team. But there's no way Kai Wagner gets called up to the German national team playing in MLS. And Ernst Tenner did admit that, look, yeah, there's been interest in Jumir Montero. Yeah, we've had interest in Kai Wagner. And he said that he's in touch with Kai Wagner and Jumir Montero in person. And he's also in contact with their agents. But he said there's basically 2 clear situations. They are first contracted with us, and they are expected to come back. Kai Wagner is expected to come back at the start of the season, while Jumir Montero is going to come back to the team after the African Cup of Nations, which, by the way, the African Cup of Nations starts January 9th, and it lasts until February 6th. MLS starts February 26th for the Philadelphia Union against Minnesota United. And Ernst went ahead and said, even furthermore, that the market over in Europe is, in this moment, bad. There is not much movement. I'm pretty relaxed as of now, but at the same time, alerted and prepared if anybody is going. And we will definitely replace them. Ernst Tenner later on in the press conference said, we're always looking at ways to improve the Philadelphia Union. We're always going to make the Philadelphia Union as best as we can. If a good player is available, we're going to take advantage of that and bring them to the Philadelphia Union. And that's the mindset that you want from a sporting director. If they can make this roster better, they're going to go ahead and make the roster better if a good player is available. And that's what we as fans want to see. That's what we should be excited for. But look, I looked at this because I think a lot of people were misunderstanding the quote that Ernst Tanner said about the European market being bad. I think a lot of people took that as, oh, well, this is why they didn't go out and sign a striker. This is why they took Julian Carranza on loan, which we'll talk about that here in a minute. I don't think Ernst Tanner was talking about, okay, we're not signing players in Europe because the market's bad. I don't think he was saying signing players is bad. What he's saying is European teams aren't really signing players. They're really not going to sign players because I looked at the top 5 leagues in Europe this summer with how much money they spent, and it's crazy. Where you look, most of the season, teams had no fans in the stands because of COVID. They're not making a ton of money because of COVID. But they spent a ton of money. Where you look at La Liga, they had 240 players depart for a total of 261 million brought in. Where they had 256 players arrive in La Liga. Team spent 318 million total. That's not for one team. That's for the whole league in total. Where you look, the Bundesliga, they had 231 players depart, where they made a profit of $494 million, where they had 251 arrivals, and they spent $459 million. Serie A in Italy, they had 606 departures for $603 million. Arrivals, 242, $665 million. League One in France, departures, 279, $409 million those clubs got. Arrivals, 301. Clubs spent $430 million. And then the Premier League's the Premier League, right? Departures, 254, where clubs brought in $774 million. And you go ahead and look. Rivals brought into the Premier League this summer, 254, $1.4 billion spent between 20 clubs in the Premier League. $1.4 billion. Now, all these numbers I'm getting are from Transfer Market. So if something's wrong, don't come at me, come at Transfer Market. But yeah, I looked at it even farther, where only 5 out of 20 clubs in the Premier League made a profit. Where you go ahead and look in France, 12 out of 20 clubs made a profit on selling players as opposed to the players that they brought in. That's what I'm talking about. In Serie A in Italy, 7 out of 20 clubs made a profit. In the Bundesliga, 12 out of 18 clubs made a profit. La Liga, 5 out of 20 clubs made a profit. And then even furthermore, I was like, okay, well, this is a lot of money spent. I mean, you guys listening to those numbers, that's a ton of money spent in the top 5 leagues in Europe. After things were crazy with COVID, teams weren't making as much money, but they came out spending. I was like, okay, let me see how much money some of these teams were spending. In La Liga, 13 out of 20 clubs spent less than $10 million. In the Bundesliga, 10 out of 18 clubs spent less than $15 million. In Serie A, 4 out of 20 clubs spent less than $15 million. 13 out of 20 clubs in Ligue 1 spent less than $15 million. And then in the Premier League, 2 out of 20 clubs spent less than $25 million. I mean, clubs spend a lot of money. And it's no wonder that clubs aren't going to be active in the winter transfer market because of all the money that they spent in the summertime. And you look, like I just said, I mean, 13 out of 20 clubs spent less than $10 million in La Liga. That tells you that those clubs don't have a lot of money. And what makes you think that, okay, all of a sudden they're going to go ahead and spend this money now in the winter? You don't really see high-profile signings happen in the winter time. And so I think it's very possible, with looking at those numbers, with listening to what Ernst Tanner said, look, Kai Wagner might want to go back to Europe. I don't blame him. I think he's good enough, but teams don't have the money to spend. The Union aren't going to just go ahead and give a player away. Once Kai Wagner came for the Philadelphia Union, his market value was at $300,000. Now it's up to $3.3 million. I would expect the Philadelphia Union probably want between $4 to $5 million for Kai Wagner. But what team, other than the top teams in these 5 leagues, are going to spend $4 to $5 million on a player? They're not. They're not. So many teams are hurting for money, and so I think a lot of people mistook Ernst Tenner's quotes about the market being bad in Europe. It's not bad for selling players. It's bad for teams buying players. And so the Philadelphia Union aren't going to sell Jumir Montero just to sell him, to sell Kai Wagner just to sell them. No. Ernst Tenner wants to make a profit on these players, and if the right offer doesn't come in, he's not going to sell these players just to sell them. So I just wanted to give my thoughts on the quote that I think people were misinterpreting. Wanted to talk about Kai Wagner's interest. I mean, we heard the same thing last season. Kai Wagner said that he wanted to go back to Europe. Didn't happen. He signed a new contract with the Philadelphia Union. Maybe he re-signs another new contract. And look, at the same time, too, I think Ernst Tenner will look at situations for these players. Maybe more so Kai Wagner than Jumir Montero. I feel like Ernst has a higher appreciation for Kai Wagner than he does Jumir Montero, because Kai Wagner was his guy that he signed. Jumir Montero wasn't. Where he'll try to do right for Kai Wagner more so than Jumir Montero. But at the end of the day, I think Ernst Tenner will try to do right. But at the end of the day, it's a business. So if the Philadelphia Union can get a great offer, then they're going to sell the player. But if the offer is not there, they're not going to sell just to sell. So do with that information what you guys will. Maybe that gives you guys some hope that both Jumir Montero and Kai Wagner will be here next season. Especially with me looking up these numbers for how much money the top 5 leagues spent in the summer. I did not realize that, it was this high of numbers and so little teams spent so little money. And I mean, it's no wonder teams aren't going to be active this winter. But the last thing I want to talk about is, I mentioned it, the Philadelphia Union, they acquire a striker. They acquire Inter Miami striker Julian Carranza on loan for the 2022 season. The quote that the Philadelphia Union gave in the press release was, "The Philadelphia Union announced today that the club has acquired Julian Carranza on loan from Inter Miami in exchange for a natural second-round pick in the MLS Super Draft for 2022. The 21-year-old will be added to the Union's active roster immediately and will occupy a young designated player spot. Carranza will be on loan with the Union through the end of the year with an option to make the loan permanent." Ernst Tenner came out and said, "We're excited to welcome Julian to the Philadelphia Union and add a promising young attacker with a lot of potential to our roster. He is an aggressive player in the box and brings the versatility of a natural center forward who fits the profile of a striker we are looking for, as well as our play style. We look forward to welcoming him to the team and watching him develop in our system." When this was announced last week, there was a lot of mixed emotions. And look, I was right there too. As soon as I saw that the Philadelphia Union announced Julian Carranza as the player, I was like, oh man, this is not the player I wanted. Because you look, 3 goals in 41 matches in 2 seasons with Inter Miami. It's not great. Inter Miami signed him for $6 million. He played for Argentina's U23s, so okay, that sounds promising that he's playing for Argentina's U23s, and you're signing a player for $6 million. Obviously, there's a player in there, but 3 goals in 41 matches, it's not great. But then you go ahead and look. He only started 11 games for Inter Miami. He played a total of 1,286 minutes in 2 seasons, which is an average of 31 minutes per game, 825 minutes in 11 starts, which is an average of 75 minutes per game. Hasn't had a ton of chances at Inter Miami. And look, I'm not surprised to see Inter Miami get rid of Carranza. And from an Inter Miami standpoint, you hope that he has a good season for the Philadelphia Union where they can buy him. Because when they bought Julian Carranza, when they bought Pellegrini, he wasn't at the club. Chris Henderson or Phil Neville. It was a completely different team before these guys took over. And what happens when you bring in a new front office, when you bring in a new manager? They're going to want to bring in their guys. They're going to get rid of the old from the previous regime and bring in their guys. And Julian Carranza wasn't given a chance in Miami because he isn't what Phil Neville wanted. He isn't what Chris Henderson wanted. But at the same time, too, look, he cost Inter Miami $6 million. And I know there's the whole debate going on Union Twitter where people are like, well, the Philadelphia Union didn't spend $6 million on a player. The Philadelphia Union are getting this guy for free. So how can you be excited for a DP striker when the Philadelphia Union aren't the one spending $6 million for him? Or people are saying, oh, look, you should be happy. The Philadelphia Union are getting a player for free. And I'm kind of with those people. I get the people that are saying the Philadelphia Union didn't spend the $6 million because you're right, they didn't. But here's the thing, right? For all the people that were complaining, all the people that might not be excited about this contract, if the Philadelphia Union came out and said they have signed Julian Carranza from Argentina for $6 million, people would be going crazy. People would be ecstatic. And that the Philadelphia Union have finally spent money on a DP striker. There's a guy who has played for Argentina's U23s. This guy could be the guy to take us to the next level. We've been calling for a starting striker for how many years now? And especially a DP striker. Now, I get it, right? It's a technicality that it's a DP striker. It's because Inter Miami were paying him $750,000. And because he's an under 22 player, making that much money, qualifies for the young DP. So yes, it is a technicality, but if we signed him straight from Argentina, without him playing for Inter Miami, I think fans would be over the moon. Nobody would be complaining about this, but my thoughts on the move is this is 0% risk for the Philadelphia Union. If he works out, then we sign him permanently. The way that the press release was worded, I feel like the Union and Inter Miami have already agreed a buy option or buy price for Julian Carranza. So there will be no negotiation. That's the way I read it. Now, maybe there will be negotiation. Number two, like I said, Miami signed him for $6 million. And I know the Philadelphia Union didn't spend $6 million. Will they sign a player for $6 million? Probably not for a very long time. But obviously, there's a player in there if he costs that much money. Number three, Miami was a terrible team. And now he'll come into a team that'll create chances for him, a team that will give him a chance. Now, look, people are going to talk about, well, look, we brought in Davo last season, and he wasn't given a chance at all. So what makes you so sure that Julian Carranza will be given a chance? Well, number one, he's getting paid a lot more money than Matthias Davo was for the Philadelphia Union. And number two, I felt like that whole deal, that whole Davo situation, Ernst Tenner had to come back with something. Wasn't the player they wanted. How many times do I have to talk about that on the podcast? But now, Ernst Tenner had time to assess the market. He had time to go ahead and talk to teams and found out that, hey, look, Julian Carranza is available. He's played in MLS. He understands MLS. This is a guy who we think can make work for the Philadelphia Union. And so you bring him in, like I said, with a ton of players that can create chances. Ernst Tenner seems very high on this guy. And how many times has Ernst Tenner made a bad move for the Philadelphia Union? Hardly ever. So, yeah, point three, he was playing on a terrible Miami team. Point four, if it doesn't work out, then we just don't buy him. And just like the whole Matthias Davo situation. Obviously didn't work out. Obviously got sent back to Brazil, which I think I read reports that he was going back on loan. So I talked about that too a couple podcasts ago, where it seems like a lot of teams don't want Matthias Davo, where His club team in Corinthians don't want him. They must not think he's that good. The Philadelphia Union didn't think he was that good, so they didn't play him. And it just didn't work out, so we don't buy him. Point number 5. Like I said, he made $750,000 last year. El Senior made $500,000 last year. Well, El Senior's contract comes off the books. So 750 minus 500 is $250K, which is basically what we paid Matthias Stavro last season to train with us. So we're basically getting a player for free. Now, I'm not sure how MLS loans work because it doesn't typically happen, but usually teams agree to pay a set amount of a percentage of a loan where they're not paying the whole salary in full. So I'm just going off of what Inter Miami paid on Julian last season. So we'll just pretend that the Philadelphia Union are paying him all of that $750,000 this season. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. I'm not sure, like I said, how MLS loans work because it doesn't typically happen. But look, we're getting a play for free. And if it works out, great. We sign him. Point number 6. He has a green card, and he doesn't take up an international spot. That's huge right there. That is so huge where we were all expecting, and maybe there is, because Ernst Henner said, oh, maybe we can announce a second striker. Maybe there still is a second striker out there, and maybe it's a guy who's going to take up an international spot, but we were all assuming the first striker that the Philadelphia Union bring in is going to take an international spot. And Julian Carranza doesn't. That is huge. And if the Philadelphia Union make this deal permanent to have a player that costs $6 million, and I know some people don't like that, well, it didn't cost the Philadelphia Union $6 million. But look, what if it works out, right? Let's say that Julian Carranza gets bought by the Philadelphia Union for, I don't know, let's say Inter Miami take a loss and have a set price of $4 million set on Julian Carranza. Let's say he stays with the Philadelphia Union for 2 seasons, finishes each season with 15-plus goals. And let's say he gets sold for $12 million. Well, now the Philadelphia Union make a profit of $8 million. And here's the thing too, right? Because he qualifies for a young DP, that means that Julian Carranza, once he gets sold, he acts like a homegrown player where the homegrowns get sold and the Philadelphia Union see all of that money. It doesn't, some of that percentage doesn't go into MLS. No, all the money comes to the Philadelphia Union. And because he qualifies as a young DP, 10% doesn't go to MLS. All of the transfer profit comes to the Philadelphia Union. And so that is huge right there. If the Philadelphia Union can make a profit on Julian Carranza. Because I would be shocked if the deal for the Philadelphia Union to sign Julian Carranza from Inter Miami is $6 million, what they paid. I don't think it's going to be that. I think $4 million sounds right, but even that can sound too high. But look, this guy doesn't take up an international roster spot, like I said. That's huge. Where more times than not, you bring in a striker, they're going to take up an international roster spot because there's not many good American strikers that you can bring in that won't take up an international roster spot. The Philadelphia Union can't produce a striker in their academy. Hasn't happened yet. Maybe eventually someday it will, but to bring in a young player, a young Argentine that's already has his green card, that is huge. And number 7, I talked about it earlier. Phil Neville and Chris Henderson aren't the ones who signed Carranza. And so it's typical. When you bring in a new staff, you get rid of all the old. So there is zero risk. I'm super happy with this move for the Philadelphia Union. Hopefully you guys are too. And I think he'll be given plenty of chances with the Philadelphia Union. I think eventually we'll see him starting for the Philadelphia Union, taking Sergio Santos' spot. I think we'll see a lot of Casper and Julian starting together. I think we'll go back to the 4-4-2 diamond to get both of these guys playing in the lineup. But I guess you could go with the Christmas tree 4-3-2-1 and play Casper as a 10 and play Julian as the lone striker. I guess you could do something like that, but the one thing is for sure, the Philadelphia Union needed a striker. They got an early Christmas present for the Philadelphia Union fans. And Ernst Sinner did say, maybe there is a potential that the Philadelphia Union bring in a second striker, but I think for that to happen, you have to get rid of one of the three that you already have. And I think the most likeliest of that would be Corey Burke, because he has MLS experience and he's proven that he can, one, stay healthy, two, that he can score in MLS, and teams value that. So I think Corey Burke would be a player that the Philadelphia Union would be willing to let go of because he takes up an international roster spot. He's a free agent after the 2022 season. I don't think they'll give him a new contract, but we shall see. Those are my thoughts on the moves for Julian Carranza, what can happen with Kai Wagner, Jameer Montero, all the MLS news, potential Jack Elliott contract, and yeah, hopefully you guys, the offseason just getting started. Hopefully we have a lot more news to talk about, a lot more exciting news to talk about. Hopefully we get a couple more signings in here. Hopefully Kai Wagner and Jameer Montero stay with the Philadelphia Union. Hopefully Jose Martinez stays with the Philadelphia Union. And yeah, just hopefully you guys don't try to just burn everything down on Twitter. And I know that's a tough ask, but look, I'm happy with this move. And yeah, I think we'll probably get a couple more signings in before the transfer window closes. I think we'll have some player news to talk about in regards to contract extensions. I mean, what more do you want as a Philadelphia Union fan for the Philadelphia Union? I mean, Sarasa is pretty good the way it is, and if you can bring in players to make it even better, even stronger, it's only a plus. But not from me ranting. Like I said, if you guys want to come onto the podcast, I really do hope that, whether you've been on the podcast before, whether you've never done a podcast before and you like talking about the Philadelphia Union, hopefully you guys will want to come onto the podcast. And once I come back, we'll talk about the offseason and hopefully have more news to talk about. And by the way, I don't know how many of you guys listen on Spotify. I don't think a ton of people do. I think most people listen on Apple Podcast. But if you do have Spotify, if you do listen on Apple Podcast, Spotify just came out with a new feature where you can review a podcast now, where you can give it a rating of 1 to 5 stars, 5 being the highest. All you have to do is listen to a podcast episode for 30 seconds, and you can go ahead and leave a rating. And so I know I had people leave a rating on Apple Podcasts, and all the people that have done that in the past, I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. And if you haven't done it, hey, go ahead and leave a review, a rating for the podcast on Apple Podcasts. But yeah, if you guys have Spotify and if you don't listen to the podcast on Spotify, just listen to an episode for 30 seconds and give it a rating on Spotify, because the higher the rating, the higher that Spotify suggests the podcast to people that are interested in soccer. It suggests people that are in the Philadelphia market, people that are interested in MLS, and the same goes for Apple Podcasts. So the more reviews, the more ratings that I have, the easier it is for the people to find the podcast. So you guys can go ahead and do that if you haven't already. I would greatly appreciate that. But if you guys aren't following the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, go ahead and follow @FreeKickPod, wherever you get your podcast, The Free Kick. And yeah, hopefully we have some news to talk about once I get back. And I know I've said that probably 10 times by now, but I just feel like there's more news coming very soon for the Philadelphia Union. I don't know why. Nobody's told me that, but I don't know. I just have a feeling that in the next couple days, maybe the next week or two, we'll have some more news to talk about on Twitter. And I'm sure there will be people complaining because they're not happy with whatever move the Philadelphia Union make. And there will be people that be happy with the move. But until then, my name is Todd, and this is the Free Kick Podcast.